Hi, everybody.
Hello,
I am Morgan Gohan,
and I'm Sophie Benifer. Hello.
and we're here to talk to you today about what it's like, kind of working remotely, working kind of distributed between different locations, and some kind of practical tips and tools to make your life easier in the working world. So to start, who are we? My name is Morgan Gowen. I am a mission designer with Hangar 13 Games. I've been in the industry for 6 years, and my role at the studio is that I'm kind of the nexus point between artists and programmers and other different designers to get all of their content into the mission and get it working well.
Sorry, I had a little fly going around me. It was really irritating me. So I'm Sophie Benifer. I'm also from Hangar 13. I am a writer. So I have been in the games industry for just over 2 years now. But before that, I was in TV. And the kind of my main role is obviously writing, but it's also devising story, coming up with characters, and working with all the departments, making sure we're all aligned and creating the best game we can. So yeah, that's us. Um, so we the kind of thing that we wanted to start with, obviously communication is crucial. It's not kind of rocket scientist. That's something we all use. But I think the subject of kind of cross-site communication is now more prevalent than ever. We've been basically due to COVID, a lot of us have been working from home, and going forward, kind of the shape of how we work has changed. So we'll all be dealing and communicating with people that are working from home permanently in a remote situation, part-time remote, and even overseas. Lots of people have moved to nicer locations during, made them think of their different lifestyles. So I think it's applicable to everyone now, really. Yeah, so the kind of I because my role isn't my experiences aren't really kind of delegating or implementing this kind of stuff. I can only really talk of my experience, and my teams. So what is it like working with a distributed team? My boss and my boss's boss and my boss's boss's boss is in America, just like Morgan, and I'm in the UK. So, from the get go, when we started, it was not only difference in countries, but time zones, working all of that out. But for me, the kind of main things that ease that working across sites, the couple of things that I want to talk about. When we first started, it's obviously not always um, easy to do, especially if you're really far away from each other. I mean, we are far away from each other, but luckily
Yep.
I got an opportunity to come to America, and meet the team. And I think if you can do that even once, I think it makes just such a difference if you are even just at one time able to meet in person, because it's different. Even us, you know, it's odd because we're so used to this right now, talking over Zoom, but you would have so many different layers if we were meeting in person. So having that kind of groundwork, I think, really does help. Um, but it's not always possible. And if people are working remotely, you're not necessarily going to have that opportunity. Um, Actually, me and Morgan have literally just met about what 2 hours ago. We work at the
Yeah.
same company, but um, so yeah, I guess other ways is I think it's really crucial to establish bonds, and the kind of the ways to do that. Um, I think obviously you're working together, but the more you know each other, it doesn't need to be personal secrets and ins and outs, but um, the more you know someone, the more you know their ticks, their strengths, their weaknesses, um, and then you're able to provide for them just as much as they're able to provide and and know how to communicate with you. Um, I think it's also important to try and carve out time that isn't about work. So just having those chats, talking about the industry yourself, talking about your weekend, it does give a lot of again groundwork for building relationships. And without a relationship, you can't really communicate. You can't communicate well. You can communicate, but you just shout at each other, which wouldn't be the best thing.
So we have our kind of optional social time once a month, where we just have
Mm.
like an hour. We also have this time period that we've in the studio that we call the golden hours, which are kind of the overlap of core hours in between the U.S., which is primarily California, but like I'm in Texas,
Mm.
and the UK, Czech, and the Czech studios. Um, so we've kind of carved out an hour once a month on, Thursday, where we kind of all get together, and it's just we're having a snack, we're just talking, hopefully not about work, but we can, and that's kind of what Sophie was talking about, with kind of just a little bit of social time. It's not strictly enforced, but it's a time where you, if you want to go socialize with your coworkers and have that social element, you can.
Yeah, and I think again, like you said, there's no pressure there. It's not enforced. People can come and go there, please. Like some people are more sociable than others, even if you were in the office. Not everyone is going to go to every social event. Um, so yeah, and the golden hour, I think, is it's both a good thing and a bad thing depending on what time zone you're on, because you're either going to be just woken up or maybe just about to go off for the
Mm-hmm.
day. So you've got those those kind of things to deal with, I guess. In either someone has a coffee or someone, I don't know, has some food with them.
Mm-hmm. Often.
Yeah.
Um, So yeah, other things to think about is from kind of an implementation person standpoint is how you're handing things off. So sometimes we have to have communications like at the end of the day, our Czech and UK compatriots are handing something off to us, or like I've been chewing on this problem all day, and I need to, hand somebody the ball and have them run with it for their time zone. Um, they can become a problem though if somebody's locked files on Perforce or whatever. So it comes back to communication with what expectations are where. So one convention we have, for example, this is simple but stupid. Like things you have to talk about. If file is locked, that means somebody is actively working on it. If it's not locked but it shows as checked out, you can make changes to it. They were just testing something, and that's kind of our shorthand go-to, that everybody kind of has agreed on, and we abide by to kind of get around that time zone complication, because usually by the time you're like, hey, can you unlock that, it's midnight right where they
Mm.
are, and it's not reasonable to expect them to come unlock it for you.
I think it's
uh,
also, like those boundaries, like you say about, not expecting someone to come on at 9 o'clock when it's there. You can slip into those parameters of working a little bit later, or or sorry, my cat is now approaching, so he might jump up and try and join the chat. Um, yeah, and having those parameters, if you didn't have those things in place, then people would just be going all over the place. You wouldn't know what systems were going where. That was just a side point.
mhm. So then, something I wanted to talk about as well is how to make. So we use Zoom a lot, but we also use Slack and email and other things. And maybe what are some of the techniques that we would recommend using to make that kind of asynchronous chat communication, written communication, the most clear. Um, so there's three big things I want to talk about. One is don't just say hey, and that's it as your first message, because that like shifts my attention over to your message, and then I'm waiting right, for you to ask whatever the question is. And it wastes just a little bit of time. And it's not a big deal for like one individual question, but if everybody keeps doing it throughout the day, it's constantly interrupting whoever you're talking to. It's kind of
Mm.
annoying. So, especially if you're like, hey, and they're not online or don't respond, then they can't even get your question before you've woken back up for the day. So, avoid saying just hey, just like include whatever your question is in the entire message. If you want to
And I
ping
think
them
just say,
without,
oh, sorry.
go ahead.
I think it's just, saying, again, simple things of like, how are you as well? Just so it doesn't seem like you're just going, I need this answer, give me this answer. You
Mm-hmm.
care about the communication that you're going. Anyway, sorry, carry on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but you can include that all in one message in like, line breaks or whatever. And if you don't want to interrupt them, if that's kind of what you're going for, you can say something like, "Hey, if you're not busy, I would like to ask a question about X, and whatever it is." So they have kind of an idea of, you know, if they can get to you or not. The other thing is don't just come into, especially like for group chats where there's a lot of people or channels, don't just come in and say, "Hey, is there an expert in X?" Because there may or may not be, but like it's a little hard to decide if you're the person to be able to fix this problem, because we want to be able to fix problems if you just kind of ask a general question like that. So don't ask to ask the question, just ask the question. Even if it takes you a little while and you have to like maybe write it out in Notepad first and then paste it over to kind of get the phrasing right.
Mm.
Because it's not, you don't want to be expecting an immediate response all the time. So you want to make sure you give as much information as you can in your kind of initial send out.
Yeah, and it's going to
Um,
save time that way as well, and you don't need to rush. If you just randomly type some stuff out, then you might not be as clear and succinct as it needs to be.
mhm. Um, the other thing that I like to do is whenever I'm working through a problem and I get kind of halfway to the solution, but I run into an issue, when I go to ask somebody for help, I like to say what the overall goal was that I started with and what I'm currently working on afterwards as the second thing. Because oftentimes what you'll get is saying, oh, no, 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 you shouldn't be going down that path at all. You should actually be, doing this whole other thing. Whereas if you just ask them for where you were in the process, they would be like, wait, what are you doing? Why do you need this? Why do you need collision to work on? What? you know. So if you give them the original problem, they can sometimes suggest either a different solution altogether or edge cases that you may not have thought about because they've done this before or something like that. And if you're looking up resources on this, it's referred to as an XY problem. So if you Google that XY problem, you'll find a little bit more information on that. But yeah, just kind of whenever you're asking for help or something like that, give them the overall problem, then your actual specific question that you're working on, kind of in that order. Sophie, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you said it, yep, succinctly.
Okay. Um, some other things I wanted to talk about are kind of differences, because I communicate with both artists and programmers and designers, or all artists and programmers and designers, and they tend to communicate in different ways. In the generalization world where everybody can only fit in two categories, there are what I like to call kind of more programmer type people and more artistic type people. Now, what I mean by that is how they think, particularly how they think through problems or think through information. So if you're more of a programmer type person, you kind of think in lists and think kind of sequentially down a list of things. So Sophie can attest to this. Whenever we were prepping for this, I went down like a list of bullet points where like we're talking about this, and then we're doing this and this and this sub bullet this da 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 da. You know, whereas an
Whereas mine
artistic
was a
person,
mess. Whereas mine was
it
just
was
all
not.
over the place. And
It was it
yeah,
was
I was
it
like, well,
was very it was genius. But artistic people tend to think in pictures. Um, so they think maybe in terms of like spatial relationships. So this thing is nearer to this thing is related to this kind of thing, rather than this thing is after this. So how this works in terms of communicating is when you're screen sharing or you're talking through a problem with somebody. With a programmer type, you want to list all of the steps that you've gone through in order and say what the results were and like have it all, you know, maybe not written out, but like in your mind or in how you present it, you want to kind of present it as a list of things that you've done, what the results were, what you're expecting, why this isn't lining up. For artistic type people, you want to be able to draw on your screen. So the pen tool, I know in Zoom has it, and I imagine a bunch of other video call programs have this, actually drawing on the screen and then encouraging them to draw on it. I would also do this in person. I'd bring them a pad of paper and a pencil and watch them think through the problem because they think in pictures. So it inhibits the artistic person's thinking if you don't allow them to be able to draw it out to you. And oftentimes, if you use these types of tools, you'll get a little bit clearer communication with that type of artistic thinking person. Like there are some programmers who think like an artist. It is rare, and they, tend to be in kind of the hybrid like programmer artist positions, like a technical artist or something like that. But um, this also applies for when you're writing wikis and stuff like that, like explanatory documents for how to use different tools or processes. You want to include both text and pictures with a lot of diagrams and everything else so that you can capture both of those types of people and both of those types of communication styles. So just something to think about. And like, there's going to be edge cases and exceptions and people who think both ways, but in the generalization of where there are two classifications of people, this is kind of some tips on how to handle those two types of people.
I think when I first started, because as I say, writer more artistically type, there was a lot of language that I didn't know, and I think it's helpful, easier for you in the long run as well, knowing both ways. So, art and narrative are quite similar in the way that they work and go through things like their processes, but at the beginning, kind of design was like, what are you talking about? So knowing those technical terms, I mean, I tech stuff is still a different language to me, and especially like back end and programmers and things like that. But I think having that base level of knowing everyone's terms as well is always going to give you a bit more of a footing in being able to express what you want and need. And
that's very true. And if you're coming to a new studio, if you're starting a new studio, you may just keep a little document to yourself with kind of the terms that you hear or that you're reading, and kind of keep track of that in kind of a cheat sheet for yourself. That's a really good point. And
I still do that
then
now.
yes,
2 years
yes,
in, I'm like,
exactly.
what is that?
But yeah, and then I think Sophie, you wanted to talk about some cultural differences with communication.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we're all we're all different, so we all work in different ways. But again, I can only speak with our offices. So we have one America, Brno, Prague, and here. I didn't say
In Brighton, yeah.
UK. Yeah, the place I am in Brighton. Um, and stereotypes can be based on kind of generalizations, but uh, I think Morgan could attest that generally American way of communicating is a little bit more open, more confident, whereas UK is a bit more reserved and a bit quieter. And Brno people are just tell it like it is, which I love. But yeah, I think it's always bearing that in mind, that I think sometimes it can feel a bit jarring, and it's easy sometimes to take it the wrong way. But people communicate in different ways, especially, and it's more prevalent, I guess, when different cultures are different countries and stuff are talking. So I think it's just go on. You
Particularly in written communication.
Okay, as in that's interesting. As in you find it difficult, or that
Oh
we
no,
find it
it
difficult.
sometimes the cultural differences make it a little hard to understand or get the nuance, particularly
Mm.
emotional nuance, if it's in writing in
Oh,
particular.
completely. Yes. Yeah. I mean, we've all had, even with a text, even when you send it to a friend that you know really well, and you mean it in one way and they take it in a completely different way. But I think, being in a professional environment, you just have to be mindful of that. And I think it's always good and I don't always do this, but, know that they're coming from they're not trying to be, aggressive or harsh in any way. It's just their way of speaking. And sometimes people are being aggressive or whatever, but that's a different story.
Yeah, and there will be exceptions to this, of course, like we know that, but it might be a good idea if you're working with if you're going to be working with a culture that's very different to yours, to maybe do some little bit of research and to have some expectations. If you don't, just kind of keep in mind that people are generally coming from a good place. You know, they're not trying to be mean. So one thing when I first started, I did not know how to interact with Czech people, and um, if they don't like something or if they think it's bad, they will just tell you, like not
Mm,
meanly, but they will just state it extremely clearly with no room for error. No, that doesn't work. That if you do that, then it will be completely broken if you do it like that. And you need to fix this, which to an American is like, this is horrible. You're a fraud. This is awful. So just in those beginning days when you're sort of feeling out the different cultures at your company, just keep in mind people are coming from a good place. Try not to take things personally. Take a breath. If something makes you angry, particularly in text like over email or Slack, take a breath. Maybe come back to it
wait.
later.
Yeah.
Ask for clarification. like
Yeah.
because also people from Czech, English isn't their first language, and like they can speak at least two languages. That's amazing. I can't do that.
Yeah.
So they're having to do this in a language not their own. You know, just
Yeah.
just just
Completely.
keep that in mind. Give them some grace, and try not to be too reactionary to a communication style that's very different from the one you're used to.
And I think that's similar with we're in a women in games conference, so we can't not talk about specifically women being in games. For we do communicate in different ways. And again, there's exceptions, but I think because the industry obviously has gotten so much better, but the industry was and still is very male dominated. I think hopefully guys will agree with me in saying that the way they communicate, they're definitely a more I'd say loud and talk over each other and don't take offense to that. Whereas women hold back a little bit more. I think maybe react a little bit more to each other rather than just going over it. And so when I first started, I was just like trying to get a word in sometimes can be a challenge. But me and Morgan were talking about before, we're both people that will say something anyway and make sure it's heard. So not everyone feels comfortable with that, and you don't have to be shouting your point out at every moment. That there's times to choose your battles. But I think it's important to know that your voice matters, even if it's a room of loud women, which I don't think actually I've ever been in a room with just women unless it's specifically a women in games conference or something like that. But yeah, I think it's understanding as well a little bit of the same with cultural differences. They don't necessarily, or they're not meaning it in a mean or harsh spirited way the majority of the time. It is just a different way of communicating, and that we have to adapt and
Mm-hmm.
slowly get used to that.
Mm-hmm. And over time, as there's more women getting into the industry, which I hope y'all will be part of, then I believe the culture will shift and change to kind of accommodate those different communication styles. So Sophie and I have had to develop kind of sharp elbows to like get in there and get our voices heard. I hope in the future that does not have to be a skill that people have to develop, because it's not in a lot of people's nature, and
Yeah,
it's very uncomfortable sometimes.
yeah,
So one thing to think about if that's not in your nature, but you need to get your point heard. I know for Zoom has a sidebar chat, a written chat that you can put your thoughts into. If it doesn't get seen there, you can always send an email around. Do kind of that more delayed written communication to kind of get all of your thoughts out. if you're being kind of verbally overrun in the meeting. So something to think about. And if it continues, obviously address it. And there's, I'm sure, many talks on kind of how to do that. If you're getting interrupted or people are ignoring you. Um,
Mm.
but do as much as you can. We're here with you. We're trying to put down the ladder for you. But just keep in
Mm.
mind, it's not always from a place of mean spiritedness. Like Sophie said, oftentimes it's just how they're used to speaking, particularly Americans, particularly American teams. Uh, yes, you see that laughter. Yes. So just something to keep in mind. Something to if you do think you would be comfortable with it, practicing it. Um,
Mm.
and because it will be uncomfortable, but leaning into that discomfort and practicing that kind of skill and communicating. And then the last thing we wanted to briefly touch on was kind of the different tools and maybe when to use them and when to not, as far as communicating across the team.
And just to let you
Um,
know, we've got about 5 minutes. So, uh,
Thank you.
I,
Uh,
I
so some of the different tools that we use a combination of Jira, which does our task tracking and bug tracking. We use Slack for kind of our IM Instant Messenger written chat. It also does video chats, but we don't tend to use those. We use Zoom for that. Email, and
Just
then our
taken over
wiki,
the
which is
world.
on. Yes, and then our wiki, which is on Confluence. So we tend to, when we have a lot of people that they all kind of need to hear each other and talk at the same time, we'll use meetings for that. But if it's something where, particularly with issues or bugs, or it's longer and more complicated and needs a lot more detail to get resolved, we'll tend to use email that a big email chain that bounces back and forth. Um, so could this meeting have been an email? Sometimes, particularly because we're distributed, we have even less time, even less overlap time for meetings. So we try to be very, either they're stand-ups and they're quick, or they really have to happen, or it's going to be an email. And try to have the majority of your conversations that way, so that it can reach everybody, and you're not having just a big old block of meetings for everybody. um, Slack is always great. Just keep in mind that all the stuff we've talked about before, all of those apply to kind of that written message, and absolutely makes sense of the channels. There's some amount of search function, but you don't want to use it as your primary resource of knowledge, because its search features aren't as good as some other ones. Um, so to that point, we use a combination of Jira and Confluence, and they go together and often interlink with each other. Confluence, our wiki, is where we store a lot of our information that needs to be distributed to multiple different people in a very concise format. So we have proprietary software. All of our information for how to use that proprietary software is contained in a wiki, rather than contained in like a Discord or a Slack. Even though search tools leave something to be desired, the file structure and the way that we're able to put it up on that wiki enables us to have like new user guide, guide for this, how to open the editor, how to play the game. It enables us to put it all in one place. That's a lot more accessible than kind of the live feed variety of something like a Discord or a Slack. So particularly when you're working with really large teams, think about using that kind of, and like for smaller student teams, this could be like Google Docs or something like that. Just somewhere up on the cloud that everybody can see, that is kind of the container for all that information that everybody needs to know. Rather than having it in, oh, it's that email that's dated blah 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 blah, and I just pull it up. No, we you need to have it kind of in a little bit of a database.
I sent it to you. I sent it to you 2 weeks ago. Why have you not?
No.
So,
Yeah. Um, yeah. And I know we only have a minute. And briefly, we also have an out of office alias to let everybody know when everyone's going on vacation. Because as you can imagine, that's complicated. Um,
mm.
so that kind of enables us to search through and see, okay, who's on vacation, who should I not be expecting a reply from in the next week, kind of thing. So if there's somewhere to post up when people are going to be out of the office, that would also be super useful on especially on the larger teams. Um, so yeah, Sophie, did you have anything to add to that?
Um, no, just that my cat is staring at me, waiting for me to be finished. Oh, you might say, oh,
Yeah,
there he goes. There we are. He wants to go out the
yeah,
door. No,
yeah.
that's just, always have your cats. They're great ways to
Uh-huh.
icebreakers. If you like cats, I guess. If you don't, then bring your
Yeah.
dogs into the meetings and conversations.
hmm but yeah, that's kind of our tips and tricks for to hopefully make your cross-site communication a little bit easier, especially in this kind of work from home world. But I hope you all have a good rest of the day and enjoy the conference.
And get in contact if you have any questions or whatever.
Yes.